Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Press Break podcast here on the Her Hoop Stats Network. I know a little bit different first voice that you're hearing. We're gonna have to start like a Her Hoop Stats like injury report across the pods, a press break injury report. Chelsea is out today, feeling.
Yeah, Tyler, you gotta watch yourself.
That's I know. I feel like I'm next. This feels like inevitable. Like, oh my goodness, I'm getting a little shook. I ain't gonna lie. But Tyler and Jamie here holding it down for you guys this week. Look, we have reached a point in this season where we have 3 undefeated teams left. And those are the teams that we want to talk about this week. Obviously, there's a ton going on in women's basketball right now across the board, across the entire women's basketball world. But we're going to hone in on these college teams this week. And I'm sure we're going to be talking on Rival next week after we get our first look at the games and all these different types of things, which I'm super, super excited for. Jamie, I'm glad you're back and feeling better again. Now I feel like I have to like look over my shoulder for like
just get your flu shot. You know, that's
everyone go get your flu shot. Everyone
yes,
get your
please
flu shot.
Get your flu shot.
This is the PSA of the week from the Press Break podcast is please go get your flu shot. But let's talk some hoops, Jamie. And we're gonna kind of go in reverse order here from the rankings. So we're gonna start off with Ohio State, who I feel like is a team that in a way has flown under the radar, but I know something that you're going to get into is the opponents that they have played so far. So it's like I don't want to say deserved to be under the radar, but, you know, they haven't really had like that marquee matchup, that marquee win. I'll let you kind of give the tail of the tape here for Ohio State, and then we can talk about them as a team. But dive into kind of, I guess, their journey of sorts almost into being undefeated so far.
Yeah, it's really interesting because as we will certainly get into here with our next team in LSU, that's been a kind of perennial narrative is talking about LSU's non-conference schedule. And the really interesting thing is that this year, the reality of the situation is Ohio State's non-conference schedule was worse. And again, obviously now we're into conference season, and so we are beyond that being the entirety of the situation, but it's definitely worth noting. So, you know, I'm a big numbers person, and so I rely on Her Hoop Stats for a lot of stuff, but I have a whole list of sites that I get through, and one of them is Warren Nolan, and they do a non-conference strength of schedule on there, which is super useful, and Ohio State's was 179. And Ew. So we're not seeing a ton of extremely high level competition there. They performed well, you know, they generally were at least around predictions, even in blowout games. But you know, there just wasn't a whole lot of, like I said, high level competition.
Right.
And so that's definitely been big for them. And getting into conference play now, we're seeing some closer games, beat Michigan by 7, beat Oregon by 9. And so they are still getting things done, but they're going to have big challenges coming up. Their best win of the season so far has been when they beat Stanford, who, going by again, our Her Hoop Stats rankings, that's the 24th team in the country based on our analytics. And so that was on a neutral court. It was predicted that Ohio State would win by 3. They won by 25. And so that's a really big win. That was a solid matchup. That was a really big game for them. That was the only game that had an under 60% pregame win expectancy for them. So that was certainly, it went a long way to proving, all right, this isn't just a result of our schedule. We are a legitimate team. And then throughout the rest of the season, they're favored in every game until they go out to California and play both UCLA and USC.
Those LA trips are so wicked.
It's like, crazy.
I don't envy any Big Ten teams having to do the doubleheader in LA.
Back, like it definitely is pretty absurd. And so they have, it's just a weird situation there where you have all of those really major factors that play into that road trip, but beyond that, you're favored in every game. And so to me, those 2 games are big. I've kind of noted some potential stumbling blocks maybe for each of the teams as well. And to me, the ones that I see are the Maryland home and home. To have to go up against Maryland twice is tough. There's that depth in the post in Maryland, I think, could be an issue for Ohio State. And then they have kind of a trap game with Washington, I think, where
right before the trip to LA.
Yes, you host them, but it is right before you go out to California. And man, they've played so well in big games.
Yeah.
They really haven't gotten that like big upset win that they've been looking for, but gosh, they've been right there. And so that's a really intriguing one for me. And I mean, to me, the big things for OSU are having that depth. They struggle when they get deep into the bench at times, especially, just against Oregon the other day. Had some foul trouble, had to get a little bit deeper into the bench than maybe they wanted to. And so they really struggled at points against Oregon. They go one-on-one a lot. They're like bottom 4th in the country in assisted shot percentage. And I mean, that's kind of a personal stylistic thing. I really like team basketball, but even so, it can make you a little bit easier to defend. And then their perimeter scoring. They have a pretty low 3-point attempt rate. They are much more looking to get to the rim, which is great.
For sure.
But I think against a solid defense, that's going to be potentially a little bit of an issue. They have really capable scorers, really capable shooters. There's a couple players that just don't take a ton of them, like Taylor Terry, I think, in the right situation can be a big threat. So those are like kind of the question marks I have long term. But yeah, Ohio State is a really interesting one for me because obviously there's the potential for an unbeaten matchup with the other team that I haven't mentioned yet, UCLA, who we'll get to. But to get there, you have to win at Nebraska. You have to beat Maryland. You have to get through that kind of trap game of Washington. UCLA is the first game of their trip, so it wouldn't even be having to get through USC. But I really wonder if they end up undefeated by the time they see UCLA.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I mean, looking at it, certainly the Maryland game at home is the one that like you immediately put your eyes to. The points you made about Maryland are very well taken in that sense and how they can cause trouble for Ohio State. I think Ohio State this year is a bit interesting to me because it's a similar philosophy. And, obviously Ohio State has been known for their defense, but I feel like they just generally have certainly limited in the dimensions of how they score, but more scores than they have had in years past. I think a big thing for me is you've only had your highest score has only been below 20 points in 3 games this season, which I think is a great sign in that sense. And it's been a pretty decent mix of like who has been beating the scoring route, whether it be Julian Cambridge, whether it be Cody McMahon. Like, oh, excuse me, oh no, my sickness is coming. Oh no, it's over the shoulder. But they're definitely like, to me, like they're the clear third when it comes to the unbeatens as of now. Like, it's just with what we have been presented. I will say, like, the one opponent that Ohio State and LSU share, one team handled it way better than the other one, and that team was Ohio State. So, like, if you want to compare like that, technically Ohio State would be in the lead. I still think from just like eye test, like I still think I'd take LSU over Ohio State as of right now. But yeah, I would like to. That Maryland game is one where I think I would go Maryland in that game. Certainly the other trip up games are very possible, especially I like the Washington shout. I like the away at Nebraska shout when it comes to just looking like pre UCLA.
And those 3 games are back to back to back.
Yeah, like it feels like that's a hell of a stretch to be going into LA before.
You know what? That's not even mentioning that you have to go to Penn State, who I'm shocked at the way that they've played in Big 12 or in Big 10 play so far. I would anticipate them having gotten another win thus far, and especially with Ohio State. They have, Isham Petty's very solid. They don't have like a true 5. And you know who Penn State has is Gracie Merkel, who if you are not there and able to body her up, she can absolutely dominate inside for stretches. And so Ohio State absolutely should win that game, and I think they do. But gosh, even that one, when you add that onto going Maryland at Nebraska, Washington, all before your California trip, like that's a very, very difficult stretch.
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you. Again, like part of me wants to be more confident in Ohio State than years past because not that they have like the dimensions of scoring, but just when it comes to the volume of scoring across their team, you have what is it, 5 players that average double figure points, which is something that again Ohio State hasn't always had. Like you'll have 1 or 2 maybe that are like true like okay you can go get us a bucket. They have several on this team. The Beachance Gray, Cambridge, Cody. Like there's players on this team that can go do that. But to your point, if I was to bet on who's going to be the first team to take a loss, it'd be Ohio State. And it's not even like necessarily a knock on Ohio State, but like the stretch that is coming up is wicked. Like if they make it to LA undefeated, you're feeling very, very good. And then kind of whatever happens in LA happens in LA. But like if they make it up to that point, my opinion on Ohio State will have more than likely drastically changed, to be honest, and in my confidence with them if they're able to if they show up to that UCLA game and it's a battle of undefeateds, I'm feeling very, very good about Ohio State at that point. Now, once we get to LA, different story. That's a different dialogue because those LA teams are kind of different. But once that's what I'll be eyeing is like the LA benchmark, and that's kind of I guess almost like where I'll not check back in is if like I'm not paying attention, but like when it comes to like where a benchmark moment for Ohio State will be okay. Where are y'all at before you head to LA?
That's I think to me the stretch before LA is much more impactful to the way I see them. Like because I mean I don't anticipate them winning either of those games. It's on the road. They're back to back, and they're just difficult matchups. Like UCLA we'll get into, but and then USC. I mean they're a great team. And especially to be playing them after UCLA is going to be tough. So whatever happens out there, I don't think is going to drastically diminish my opinion of Ohio State. But the way that they handle the games leading up to it is, I think, really going to be what gives me my best look at where they're at.
Yeah, I agree. Let's move on to our next team, who we just actually got, as the time of recording this, last night. They played a close game against Vandy.
Yes.
Vandy almost pulled it out. I'm not going to lie, for agenda purposes of the Vanderbilt agenda that has been pushed, I was kind of rooting Vandy on. Like
Vandy's getting their groove back a little bit.
A little bit, because the SEC start.
Blocks. They had a little bit of a stumble, but they're so young. It's okay.
Yes.
You're allowed to have some growing pains there. But man, that would have been a big one.
A fun one. Yeah, no, that game was super fun. Again, Vandy, like the state of Tennessee is on the come up. Like when it comes to like their teams, like that is like they. Like, I mean, obviously we know what Tennessee is, like Tennessee, the program is, but like, obviously them being on the way back, Vanderbilt, Middle Tennessee is always just a pain to have to go against.
I know. Yes.
Yeah. So like, there's like, Tennessee is quickly.
Well, especially like for having both Tennessee and Vanderbilt to have like fairly and brand new and young coaches that
this isn't going away anytime soon.
Pretty much say like, successful hires in both cases.
Oh, for sure.
Just incredible. Like wow, that is, oh man, I'm so excited. Like I saw Vandy last year. We not to like completely digress, but like we saw Vandy out in Vegas, Iowa State did, and I was like, yeah, they definitely have something there, and they've continued to prove that. And then Tennessee, well, shoot, we just saw Tennessee and Vandy back to back against LSU.
Yes,
so like, yes, this
both
is
games were close.
But, man, I mean, I think the Kim Caldwell hire has been an absolute home run. Which I said that is one of the most difficult hires that has probably been made in women's basketball in the last couple decades. Like that's just a tough place to go.
For sure.
Tough shoes to step into, and I was like, they hired who? Especially because so many people thought that like Kara Lawson was
you expected the Tennessee family tree to
that they like went really far outside of that. It's kind of what we talked about with the W, where like people had to try something different, and dang, they did, and they crushed it. I've been so impressed with Tennessee. And to that point, that's the 2 games that LSU had this past week.
Yeah.
And they handled them.
They did what they had. Look, you come away with a W. Like, that's kind of what you asked for. I mean, I'm intrigued for you because there's now been a couple of these close games against kind of varying levels of opponents is the way that I would put it. And I think some of these scores that are probably LSU loves to like go into a game close, like first through third, and then they'll pull away in the fourth, and then you have like, if you just look at the score, you wouldn't even know it. But like we've seen some different things. But also on the other hand, you see the performance of their big 3 against Vanderbilt and Michaela Williams, Flau'jae Johnson, and Anissa Morrow, where they just produce so much, you know. And obviously you're playing the whole game; it's still a close game, but you're going against Tennessee, who has been just right there when it comes to winning one of these big SEC games. You're with Vanderbilt, who is one of the, I mean, arguably like the most like on the come up team right now in the nation. Like you can make the argument for that. So like even though these games are close, I don't even like I don't take that as like a negative for these games by any means. So I'm interested for you from an LSU perspective. Obviously we know the dialogue around their non-conference. Again, honestly, the non-conference was better this year than in most years. The other teams just didn't do them any favors. You can't help that Tara retires from Stanford. You can't help that NC State, who was a Final Four team last year, is not that same caliber of team this year. Washington is a good win in that non-conference. So I don't. It's not the exact same as in past years where it's just like absolute, you know, respectfully, nobody teams in that way that, you know, sometimes you've never even heard of before. This year was better in that sense, and obviously as we get into SEC play, like now we really get to find out about LSU. So your initial takeaways from LSU so far as we've kind of got into conference play, and they've had now 4 wins against at Arkansas, at home versus Auburn, and then as we mentioned at Tennessee and hosting Vanderbilt.
Yeah, they're interesting. So like I said, looking at their non-conference strength of schedule, so much better this year than past years, and definitely better than Ohio State. They were sitting at 63, so it's not terrible. And you know, to your point, they did have some solid games in there. Like I said, looking at the Her Hoop stats rankings, because you know AP stuff, it's voted on. You can get information from it. It doesn't tell the whole story. Also, there's a million different metrics you can use. I'm sticking with what I'm sticking with ours. Argue with the wall. Stanford's 24th in those rankings, and LSU beat them in overtime. NC State actually sits at 14th in our Her Hoop stats ranking. So that's by that margin, that's a really big win for them. Washington's 53rd, so I mean they're up there. That's at least another power conference opponent. Tennessee's at 9th in the Her Hoop stats ranking, so that's really big. Vanderbilt sits at 17. So I mean they have some solid games. Their best win on the season is at Tennessee, like I said, ranked 9th. And it was a predicted favorite of a half a point. So LSU was favored by half a point at Tennessee. Obviously you're not going to win by half a point. They actually won by 2. That was a pregame win expectancy of 51%. So like it was really kind of a coin flip. The previous low was 69% pregame against NC State. Like they really have been expected to kind of dominate their schedule. But you can only play the games that are on there, right? So you know, it's more how you perform in those games, even against competition that is inferior, frankly. And generally LSU has performed. They've been fairly well under their anticipated win margin in quite a few games. But when you're regularly predicted to win by 30 plus points, there's diminishing returns, especially with them They've had to try to figure out the rest of their lineup. They've had to try to get people more comfortable out there. I think about in the non-conference, we saw a lot more minutes out of Jersey Wolfenbarger, just trying to get her ready to go and to play on the interior. I think about how they were kind of trying to shore up their guard play, trying to figure out, okay, how much can we get Jada Richard out there? Had a couple games that last year. Poa have had Miracle Shepherd hurt, and so there's a lot that they were doing in those games that kind of skews things. But it's there's nothing that's like massively concerning in there. I don't think, it's just, again, you can only play the games that you play. And so that's part of what makes UCLA so impressive, which we'll get to. Looking at the rest of their schedule, kind of similar to Ohio State. They're favored in all of their games but two. And that's a big but, because the two are South Carolina and Texas.
Both away as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's kind of funny that you said you could see Ohio State being the first unbeaten team to lose, because truly it could be both them and LSU on the same day.
I'm about to say I'm not gonna lie, I said that not thinking about how close that South Carolina game is, so I might have to retract that a little bit. But yeah,
LSU at South Carolina and Ohio State hosting Maryland, both.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it really might be the same day. Yeah.
So that's gonna be a really big day there for currently unbeaten teams. It literally could come down to the fact that the Ohio State Maryland game's at 5:00 Central. LSU South Carolina is at 7. So you might be right still.
LSU, hold out. Just hold out strong.
You might be right. But yeah, so it's definitely interesting. And it's definitely a pretty significant predicted deficit. LSU has a pregame win expectancy of 14% at South Carolina. The point differential, they're underdogs by 14.5 points. And then at Texas, interestingly, Texas still sits at number 2 in their Her Hoop Stats ranking, South Carolina being number 1. And the pregame win expectancy for LSU at Texas is about 22%. They're underdogs of about 10 points. Wow. I see it. I don't know. It's really interesting. I think that some of the big deficiencies for LSU are interior play, which you talk about Texas. They just have so many post players. They have so many great forwards. And that's not to say anything about their last game. You go up against South Carolina.
Ask Jamie how she knows.
It is what it is. Damn it. No, for real though. No, for real. I was having a conversation with someone else who knows, and that was kind of what we came about, But Madison Booker ain't gonna miss that many shots.
No. We've seen firsthand what Madison I love your opinion on this, because that's what I was trying to tell people. I was like, yes, South Carolina's playing good defense. So I'm not taking away anything from that. But Madison, these are the shots Madison Booker gets to, and rising up over defenders is not that's what she does. So those shots were not bad shots, and again,
it
not
truly
to take
is
away,
a mental game.
I'm telling you, the whole team looked rushed from the beginning. When CLA, the South Carolina's home court is far and away the toughest place to play, and I don't know if I seeing that. There's very few games where you can you hear about home court advantage and everything, but I felt like you could actively see it on Texas, the home court, just having them shook. So to the point of LSU having to go and try and win there, and whether that be at South Carolina, and I've been and seen Texas, and that's not a easy environment to play either. And again, I feel like Texas will certainly play way better at home in a big matchup like that, as opposed to playing on the road at South Carolina. So those two games are both gonna be very tough. And then you also have Tennessee at home.
It definitely is. That's a really big game to what we're talking about here. So I'm gonna talk about it for a second, because that was, wow, it just, South Carolina gets in your head. that kind of is what it is. That's what separates really elite teams, is being able, like, having been there before, and being able to kind of get through the mental part of it, which is part of what made UCLA's win over South Carolina so impressive. But I mean, South Carolina's been locked in ever since. And to do what they did against Madison Booker, and what they did so well, I think, was they didn't say, well, we're completely taking her away, or we're completely taking any one thing away, but they make you take, like, the least attractive option. Something coaches say all the time is you can't take everything away. You have to kind of pick your poison. And so they decided, we don't have, that one big interior post player that we've had in the past, but we're really going to focus on kind of your other big scoring threats. And so to basically take away Madison Booker's mid-range, and I mean, Rory really likes that mid-range shot too. Didn't have a ton of them either. I thought that was really, really impressive. And so when you then look at potentially matching up with LSU, I mean, Flage, that's something that she is a 3-level scorer. She can get to the rim, but she also can absolutely pull up in the mid-range. She's someone that does so much for LSU. And so the fact that that's what they did for Madison Booker, not saying that they're really the same, even like prototype of player, but they are the same kind of level of focus for their
area of operation.
I would say. Yeah. And so that definitely bodes well for South Carolina in the way that they match up against LSU. And that's not even taking into account the fact that, Texas has a lot of interior depth, as I was saying. They have, that tremendous level of, offensive rebounding. And so that's certainly something that they do really well. And LSU does that well too. They're third in the country in offensive rebounds per game. They're first in offensive rebound rate, and that's something you get when you have Anissa Morrow. And so the fact that South Carolina was able to mitigate that, even with the second chance opportunities, definitely makes it intriguing. Anissa Morrow is really versatile in a way that a lot of Texas bigs are not. And same with, Michaela Williams, same with Samaya Smith. Like, all of them have more dimension to their game. Yeah. And so that, I think, is what's most interesting to me in that matchup, being the closest that I think is going to present a big challenge to LSU. Just because they're sort of similar in that they don't have like that one just back to the basket post that they're really focusing on, both teams. But they're really different in the way that they go about mitigating that. So, like, I mean, the stuff that I kind of mentioned for potential deficiencies for LSU, the big one is that post play. And so especially when you talk about Texas, that's where I think that could be a massive issue. You just, the amount of height, the amount of depth and size.
It's crazy.
Kyla Oldacre, I'm really, really, I mean, shoot, she couldn't get a bucket to fall on a second chance opportunity against South Carolina to save her life. But again,
she was working though, man.
Is what it is. But I mean, shoot, you get in there and the opportunities she gave her team were crazy. And I was sitting there checking. I'm like, gosh, she's not a senior, is she? And I checked and I'm like, no, she's a junior. I mean, that's going to be someone who, if she puts in some work in the offseason, which you know that she will, like Texas is another level as far as like pushing their players, developing. That is someone who I would have very high on draft boards for next year. I think that she can take a huge leap this offseason, because what we're seeing out of her this year is already so far from what we saw at Miami. I am really intrigued by her. But all of that to say, it's very different challenges from one to the other in South Carolina and Texas. And that's not even the only challenges on their schedule. You look at potential stumbling blocks. You have to go to Kentucky, who I expressed some doubts about going into SEC play, and has really
I was right there with you.
They have stepped up. They have really proven that they are a more complete team than I gave them credit for by a wide margin. And then you talk about size, you talk about length, you talk about things that I think LSU could struggle with a little bit. That's Kentucky to a T. They're pretty far down the road. They're one of their last games at SEC play, but that's what I'm really interested in. You've got Tennessee coming back to LSU, and you know that they're going to be jacked up. I mean, Kim Caldwell is sitting there saying we're, 4 or 5 points away from being undefeated, and I'm not happy about that. I'm mad. Like, I want those games.
If you're a Tennessee fan, that is the exact answer.
Love that. Absolutely love it.
Because she's
they're going to be jacked up. And then in your little sphere there, I think Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma LSU is a very, very exciting matchup. That is, I am really excited for that one. I just think the depth that Oklahoma has could present some issues. I think that they can be aggressive and potentially lull LSU into some foul trouble, and sort of similar to Ohio State, there are some issues when you get down into the bench. You've got Reagan Beers. You also have Beatrice Culleton comes in for really great minutes, and then you've got
Liz Scott as well.
Liz Scott.
Yes.
Give Liz Scott some respect. Man, you know what? There's a number of really underrated post players in the country that, like, it drives me crazy that no one talks about them. Liz Scott at Oklahoma. Let's talk about Maria Gakdeng at North Carolina. Oh my God, where is North Carolina without Maria Gakdeng? Not where they are right now. That is not at all. For sure. You talk about Deanna Gaston over at Auburn now. I mean, especially when you still have Talia Scott out, like, Deanna Gaston has really put in some work there. Like, oh my gosh, there's just such great players. But anyway, it's not a Jamie podcast unless I'm digressing.
Of course.
But no, I mean, I'm very excited for Oklahoma and LSU. Oh
yeah. No, there's a couple fun games. I think honestly, in the lead up to the South Carolina LSU game, I'm actually very intrigued by seeing the South Carolina games against Alabama and Oklahoma, because those are the way that those teams rebound is very different than the way that Texas rebounds. And obviously, with Ashlyn Watkins out for the rest of the season, and then kind of lacking like that true, like, this is our post presence. Like, Sanaya Fagan was very solid in that game. I thought Joyce Edwards was very solid in that game. So, like, obviously it's South Carolina. They have talent. But there's just not that exact, like, the comparison I keep going back to is last year when Camila Cardoso was out playing for Team Brazil, you put Ashlyn Watkins in that spot and you're cool. There's not that one-to-one replacement in role. There's that one-to-one replacement in talent for South Carolina. Yes. So I'm very interested in seeing in the build-up to this LSU game, because obviously Oklahoma has Reagan Beers who can just dominate the boards, but also they have a little bit more depth in size as well. But Alabama is more of a rebounding by committee in a type of way. You have several players that average 4, 5, 6 rebounds on that team. And so I'm interested if we see really that first quarter against Texas, like the rebounding in that was the offensive rebounding. I've never seen South Carolina get rebounded against like that. Obviously, didn't end up mattering because Texas couldn't make a shot, and that was part of the reason why they got so many offensive rebounds. But again, we just haven't seen South Carolina really have like that deficiency in a game. So like, not that I'm worried about South Carolina, and I still think South Carolina will win that game, but I'm intrigued in seeing how these other kind of archetypes of rebounding in a way look like against South Carolina in the build up to LSU, where obviously Anissa Morrow isn't the same archetype of rebounder as you have on Texas, where you just have so much size. She's more the archetype of the players that South Carolina has when it comes to being a bit smaller, but more versatile, more agile, and just working to get those rebounds in that way. So I'm interested in seeing these different kind of archetypes go up against South Carolina in these ranked matchups and their kind of ranked gauntlet that they have. But again, I still think South Carolina will win this game. I will say, though, that game against Vanderbilt that LSU had, there's not many teams that can match the output of 3 players the way like the LSU can have output from 3 players. Yeah. So the depth isn't there, and so I worry about them when they go against deeper teams. But if you're going star for star and you have everyone on LSU firing on all cylinders, so that was some of my worries early on this season was like, okay, how do you get the perimeter and the inside working at the same time on a consistent basis? That Vanderbilt game was your 3 stars. You starred your way to that win. You didn't. That was what that game was. And there's not many teams that can outstar LSU in that way when it comes to like the best player to best player. So that's something like just in the long run of this season, like if they get 20 and 20 from their 3 stars, you're feeling good. And especially if Denise Morrow is rebounding the way that she is.
You win at Tennessee because of Kaylin Gilbert. Not
exactly, who's been fantastic. Yes, we need to mention Kaylin Gilbert.
Performance.
Yes.
And so and then had a little bit of a drop off against Vanderbilt, but of course you are because you're going to be a big focus when you have a game like she did against.
She's
Tennessee.
been fantastic
and so
this season.
If she can continue to kind of step up and be that consistent fourth option, especially if you keep coming in off the bench and you can be that next option, that's really, really big for LSU. And so beyond that, it's really staying healthy and just figuring out how to pull something out of some of your other players. But yeah, I mean, as far as like the big stars, when you have Anissa Morrow that shoots 10 for 19, Flage's 10 for 21, Michaela's 8 for 13, and you get 23, 25, 20, like that's going to win you a lot of games.
A whole lot of games. Yeah. I will say though, if you're looking at teams that can match them with that, UCLA is one of those teams, the last undefeated team in the nation. I feel like UCLA, I kind of feel like we had the South Carolina game, and then everyone was like, okay, yeah, you're number one. And then we kind of just like started watching and talking about other teams. But in the process of this, UCLA has just been dominant and is only getting better as well with the way that Kiki Rice has been performing. And really kind of like, I feel like we're kind of, not that Kiki Rice has been bad by any means, so I don't want to make it sound like that. But like, this is kind of starting to feel like, okay, this is the Kiki Rice that we've been waiting to see in this way, in the past like kind of Big Ten stretch of games as we've opened this up early on. Your rundown on UCLA and what we've seen so far and what we have coming forward for the Bruins.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, people who have not forgotten about UCLA are commenters that watch and listen to the show. So, we've been seeing you. We're doing a whole episode on the undefeated team. So, I like when it's respectful, but when you're asking for it, we'll give it to you, okay?
Hey,
but no, UCLA, very impressive. I talk a lot about complete teams, and that's certainly something that I think you can say about UCLA, especially as you said, with Kiki Rice really coming on strong recently. And you want to talk about battle tested, that is UCLA. Their non-conference strength of schedule was 17th best in the country. And so they really went out there. They played high level competition. Obviously having South Carolina was really, really big, but they went to a neutral court and played Creighton and absolutely dominated them. And that was without Lauren Betts. They played Washington. You had a lot of just kind of middling competition. You don't really have any, like, for lack of a better term, basement dwellers. The worst team that they played is 233rd in the Her Hoop Stats rankings, and that's out of 360 teams, and so all of your games are in at least like the top 2/3, and that does make a really, really massive difference. So that's that goes a pretty long way, especially again when you talk about shoring up depth down the length of your bench. That means that you're getting a lot of games where you can play your bench quite a bit, but it's not just playing the lowest level of competition. It's giving them a little bit more to go up against. And that long term makes a massive difference. And for UCLA, it's pretty obvious what their best win is, right? You go up against South Carolina, you are a 3-point underdog, you have a 40% pregame win expectancy, you end up winning by 15. That was massive, for sure. That really kind of put everyone's eyes on them. And the really big thing, we talked about it when it happened, was the way that they did it. Having Lauren Betts score 11 points, I thought that it was all going to come down to her. And in a way it did. Her gravity really changed everything. But she passed extremely well. She did the little things. She rebounded. She found herself opportunities and just drew the defense in and let the rest of her team operate a lot of the time. And so the fact that they've been able to do that pretty consistently, there's most games, there's just no one that can really stop her. But in the games where she does have a tougher matchup, they just have so many other options, and she makes really good decisions. So that's been really, really big. Another part of why I think there was discussion early in the season, and there still has been, about her potentially being done after this year because she will be draft eligible. And so I do think that that's a really interesting conversation because she has shown
that's a case, man.
A tremendous level of preparedness for the next level. And so especially just for the point that the WNBA is at. Also, big players, you are going to potentially have a shorter career window because at a certain point you just are bigger, and so you're more prone to injury. It wears on your joints more, and so I do think there's a very, very compelling case for this to be her last in college. But that's a conversation for another day. But she's been absolutely incredible. And then you talk about the strength of schedule. You talk about who UCLA has played. You've got in the Her Hoop Stats rankings, 28 Creighton, 33 Nebraska, 29 Michigan, 25 Indiana. So you've played solid teams. And then you look at the rest of their schedule, and they have one game in which they're an underdog. That's at Southern Cal, and they're a 1.5 underdog. So that's definitely a really interesting matchup. We know that those LA games are always really crazy. That's going to be a really exciting matchup. But beyond that, you have some really interesting ones in the Big Ten. Obviously, the Big Ten has some really great storylines.
It's a stacked conference, man. It's really genuinely stacked.
And then you also just kind of randomly have your little detour to play Baylor on a neutral court here in a couple days.
Yeah, just like, okay.
So why not?
I mean,
that one...
UCLA should dominate that.
UCLA should dominate that one. Aaronette Vonleh has a level of at least familiarity with UCLA, but I don't think that Baylor ever really has quite figured out how to use her.
Nope.
I don't think that Baylor has quite put everything together
that
they can. That's predicted to be a 12-point UCLA victory. I do not think it's that close.
I'm about to say that might be nice.
That would be
Baylor has just not been able to piece this thing together, man.
I mean, and this is also a Baylor team that just had Dariana Littlepage Bugs thrown out of a game in the first half against Arizona State for swinging on someone. So, like,
vibes are not great in Waco.
Vibes are not great. I mean, like, again, like, especially because I cover the Big 12 and stuff, and, like, I can't, like, be out here spitting hot takes, to that degree, but like I just would like for things to settle more for the sake of the entirety of the conference, and also just for the sake of like good basketball. They have such good pieces, and it's just disappointing to watch.
Women's basketball is better when Baylor's good too, like just in general. Like it's kind of like Tennessee, like in that way where it's like it's just more fun when you have these more powerhouse. And I mean, I've been
programs. Like, you talk about players on their team. Like, I love Bella Fauntleroy as a player, and she just has had a really down year, which is sad because I think she's so versatile. She has a beautiful shot that just has not fallen. She has the ability to mix it up inside. She plays really strong. So, like, that hurts me because she's the kind of like, obviously not anywhere near as good, but like that's the kind of player I was when I played in high school. I didn't play in college, y'all. Like I knew how much time it took to be a college player. When coaches called me, I said, "Thank you so much for your interest. I am a coach's kid. I know I'm not built for it, but I'm 6'1". I shot the three. I could on occasion go mix it up inside. Like she is what I dream I would have been if I had kept playing. Like I love her game, and so I want to see her figure it out. Like. It is kind of a bummer. And so I would love for that to be a good game, but I don't see it. And so for UCLA, that kind of leaves, you have to go to Maryland, which will be again, that's is legit. Tough. Especially again, you talk about the depth that Maryland built on the interior. They can really, really focus on trying to stop Lauren Betts and say, okay, we're going to try and make you a facilitator again, or make the rest of the team pick it up. the rest of the team has been, in fact, even better recently than they were when they beat South Carolina doing that. And so I'm very excited to see kind of round 2 of that type of game from someone who actually has the capability to do it. And so I'm really excited about that. And then, as we talked about earlier, you have Ohio State coming to town, maybe undefeated still, maybe battle tested. There's definitely something to be said for learning from losses. Ohio State, the issue again, you don't have like a true 5-man. I don't know exactly how they stop Lauren Betts. So I think the big strategy that you see a lot is just trying to make life really difficult for the perimeter for guards to get the ball to the post. I have been on the record a couple times giving UCLA a little bit of flack for their post passing. It's been a lot better. It has been so improved. That's the game where we're really going to see how improved it is against Ohio State. Because I think you're going to probably see Asia Petty mostly going one-on-one against Lauren Betts and just trying to make her shots more difficult, either the entry pass more difficult by fronting because she has that length, or making the shots more difficult because, again, she has a length and so she can at least contest. But the primary focus is going to be the guards trying to make the entry more difficult. And so that's really going to be the interesting part of that matchup. But yeah, no, UCLA, I mean, they've got a pretty good lineup there for the rest of the season. They're the big kind of stumbling blocks, like I said, they're not favored at Southern Cal. That those games are going to be interesting. But the potential tough ones, I think, at Maryland, they have a trap game of their own going to Oregon before they go to USC.
I was eyeing that one.
And especially
in between Ohio State and USC.
When you talk about, between Ohio State and USC, and when you talk about, matchups, things like that, they do have Philly Shea, who can at least, like, if you tell her, you go there, you do not foul, you go straight up, you make Betts have to work around you. That's more than a lot of teams can do.
Yeah, it might not work, but it's at least something different to try.
And I think Deja Kelly's going to really get up for that game. You've got some players like Elisa Medias who I think are very capable, and so again, UCLA should win it, but I think that it could be more of a game than maybe people expect going to Oregon. And then you do close the season with USC coming to town, and so that's going to be a really interesting one. To see each other twice in like 3 weeks is kind of a funky sort of.
It happened last year too. It was. I think it was even closer last year. If I'm mistaken.
It ends up being kind of common in a lot of these conferences. Like I just wish that you would make a kind of hard and fast. I mean, technically they are in 2 different months, but like if you have 2.5-ish months of conference play, like the couple teams that you play twice, put them a month apart, man. But anyway, I'm so fascinated by UCLA. Like it was really hard for me to try to find deficiencies for them.
They're so good.
They're so good. Like the only the things that I find are picky because I'm gonna write something down. They have a pretty low free throw attempt rate, which means they mostly are finding open shots.
Right, yeah. Suffering from success, like.
But for defense's sake and stuff, that means that, all right, maybe they're not forcing teams into bad situations. So when you're talking about going against, like, the very best of the best, maybe that ends up being a difficulty there. Again, their focus on Lauren Betts can be a deficiency, but they've proven they can win without her playing at all. They can win with her having a different role. And so it's more just that it's really hard to practice doing that because almost no teams can force you to do anything besides just go through her.
Right.
And the post passing, which I said is much improved. So it's hard. It's really hard to find those deficiencies. I think there is something to be said for losing at some point. You learn from it, but gosh, if you're looking at these 3 undefeated teams, and really, if you're looking at the undefeated teams we've seen at this point in the year over the past several seasons, I think that UCLA is one that looks to be in one of the best positions to keep it rolling. You know, of the 20 teams that have entered the NCAA tournament undefeated ever, half of them win the national championship. So I'm not necessarily saying that they're going to finish the regular season undefeated. Right. But if any of these 3 teams are, it is UCLA.
Yeah, agreed.
And they look
they're really good,
man. They're figuring it out.
Like, what's crazy to me, right, is like if I said, okay, I'm going to describe a team to you that is undefeated, has a dominant big on both sides of the ball, has solid to great distribution from their guards at the top, has size, has shooting. Would I be talking about this year's UCLA or last year's South Carolina?
Yep. As soon as, like, once you got to, like, point 2, I was like,
which team am I talking about?
I know where you're going with that.
We've seen this story before. The only problem is South Carolina is not the team this year. So, like, if you're looking at it, but, like, to your point, like, that South Carolina game, I got to be there in person for that. And, like, watching, because that was always my worry about UCLA. It's like, okay, like, obviously Lauren Betts is one of, you know, the best players in the country, without a doubt, like, obviously. But when teams scheme and throw 3 players at her, what do you do? And, like, being able to see that South Carolina game, and especially, again, being there in person, or, like, because we were at, like, kind of towards the top, too. So I was, like, kind of looking, like, top down at it. And, like, watching the gravity that Lauren Betts has and how smooth it was for UCLA to play off of that, like, that's when my opinion on UCLA completely changed that day. Not even necessarily, like, obviously the win plays a massive role in that. But being able to see them play off of Lauren Betts instead of forcing it to Lauren Betts in that way changed my entire opinion on, like, from that moment on. And in my opinion, and I feel like them as a team have only grown in positive ways since that game. Like, again, like, I mean, obviously there are good teams on the schedule, but man, like, this UCLA team looks just insane. Like, I mean,
the options, the depth, like,
it's insane. It's South Carolina from last year. Like,
you have 8 players averaging 19 or more minutes a game. Like, I was looking at, okay, well, what did they struggle against last year? Like, who really got them? I mean, I thought it was kind of funny to be looking at the Oregon State game, and one of the players that had one of the best games of the season against UCLA last year was Tamia Gardner. And they went and picked her up and just added her to the roster. Like,
casual.
That's wild. And then obviously the way that Alita Artisola has gotten really comfortable.
I love her game.
Their only single-digit game of the season was Game 1 against Louisville, and also a huge part of that was Louisville was such a new team, and so it's really hard to prepare for.
Also, no Kiki Rice in that game, right?
Yeah,
that's at the beginning of the season.
That is true. And so, you know, you're missing your starter, and then you're going up against a team where you're like, okay,
you have literally no idea what they do.
There's 2 people that we can put together a scouting report on,
right? And
we kind of know their general scheme, but beyond that, you know, very little. And so just the growth from that game where I'm sitting there and I'm, of course, sitting there railing against their post pass and talk about, oh, it's the same thing again. And then the switch flipped. They were able to actually accurately prepare going forward and have just looked, I mean, it's absurd, you know, to be bringing in Tamia Gardner off the bench and Janiah Barker.
It's ridiculous.
You know, the player averaging the most minutes is Lauren Betts with 28. Like, beyond that, you literally have everyone after that averaging between 19 and 25. That's in your like core rotation. You have 7 players.
It's insane that, like, they can both, like, depth you to death and, like, win you that way, or they can go star for star with you.
Yeah.
Like, in like the LSU kind of 100%. Format. And that's what makes them so, like, I genuinely don't think that there's a game type that UCLA can't win.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
Like,
there's not one that you pick out that's like, they're gonna have to play outside their style. And like they can dictate pretty much any matchup.
And do it pretty comfortably. So we'll be on the lookout to see if, like, obviously there's some incredible matchups on deck for UCLA in the Big Ten, but I'll be pretty shocked if they don't enter, at least in the Big Ten tournament, undefeated. I don't know if shocked is the right word, because, like, some, like, both those Battle of LA's, like, let me put it like this: if it's not a Battle of LA game, I'll be shocked. If it's
Yeah.
Battle of LA, like those games are always insane. The energy is gonna be crazy. Like I could see like
I think
that
the
being a
betting
bit more of a
lines right
toss up.
now should be favoring one loss for UCLA, and it's whether you think they go undefeated or whether you think they lose that one, because beyond that, it'd be surprising to drop another. Like, I don't think they drop both of them.
No, definitely not. No.
And then beyond that, it's okay. Do they somehow have someone else beat them? Because I think the odds of it being no losses, one loss, or like 2 to 3 losses are all fairly similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one loss should like at worst. I feel like there's one loss, and I feel like it'd be in one of those Battle of LA games. Like I don't foresee it happening in any of these matches, but that's why we play the games. That's why we're going to be here to watch. Okay. That's what we're going to be here to talk about here on the Press Break Podcast. That's going to do it for us this week. Shout out to the undefeated teams for doing y'all thing. We've talked. Yes, go ahead.
I have a shout out. I almost forgot. So, really quick here at the end, since I've already talked an hour for only 2 of us. Yesterday, my mom's birthday. On social media, I credited her for 98% of my basketball knowledge and basically every other part of my existence. She is both literally, obviously, the reason I am here in existence.
This is true.
And also, metaphorically, the reason I'm here doing basketball stuff, covering basketball. You grow up in it. And so, huge shout out. Happy birthday, Coach Jody Steyer. I love you. You are the best. And secondary shout out to our fellow Her Hoop Stats friend, Calvin Wetzel. Let me know. It was also his mom's birthday. So January 13th, big day for Her Hoop Stats.
Big day for the moms.
Shout out to moms.
Look, shout out to the moms. Shout out to them, man. Wow. Happy birthday all around. What a great way to end this episode of the Press Break Podcast. Again, we'll be back here next week. We're going to have games to talk about. We're going to have a rival to talk about.
Hopefully we including all 3 of us.
Yes, hopefully it's all 3.
Watch your back, Tyler.
I'm about to say, if I'm not here, if I'm not here, you know whose fault it is. You know who to blame in next week. So, but make sure you guys subscribe to the Her Hoop Stats Podcast network so you can get all your Her Hoop Stats podcasts. Check out the website. It is the treasure trove for women's basketball stats. And of course, be tapped in here for the Press Break Podcast every week. And we will see you guys next time.